All right, just talking story. How do we get to KOI? I think I'll start with that as kind of the end goal here and the genesis of why it came to be and what its purpose is. And that really has everything to do with my story, my own journey from illness to wellness and then finally optimal health now. For me, it was really when I was 20 years old, I started having stomach issues. I'd had a seminal life event, a real stressful event, and was still very fit, surfing, active, had the goal of being a pro surfer, in fact, at the time. So I would say in terms of physicality, I was, in a high percentile. But it didn't stop my stomach from really just starting to act like it was not a part of me, somebody else's. Really, in particular, it was frequency, urgency, even bleeding, things that I had never seen or experienced. I'd never had a stomach complaint in my life, and really no physical issues up to that point. So I dealt with it by keeping it secret. I was embarrassed. I had a girlfriend. I had, my vanity, my ego, and those things driving me and my decision making. So I let it go for months, almost a full year. I had mentioned it lightly to a friend's mom, that was a confidant and a real loving person. She suggested maybe hemorrhoids, but, in the end, of course, that's not what it was. I didn't take action until I was with my girlfriend. We were staying at a hotel. She was visiting. She was going to University of Arizona at the time. And I was so embarrassed that I kept telling her that I wanted to shower or making excuses why I'd go to the bathroom. And so once again, I told her, I'm going to, shower and clean up real quick. And I went into the bathroom. I turned on the water because we were in a small hotel room where the bathroom's adjacent the room. And I thought, that would obfuscate the noise of my having a bowel movement and straining. And she came in. She just had a feeling, a sense. She was a good person, big-hearted, and had a sense something was up. And she confronted me and, kind of broke me down and made me talk about what was happening and made me promise that Monday I would take action and see a doctor. So from that, I called my mom. She worked in healthcare, an RN at the time, working actually as the director of emergency services at Glendale Memorial. She said, come in, we'll talk to a doctor casually. I went in, the doctor immediately did what's called a flexsigmoidoscopy, something they still do, which is, taking, I believe it's a 29 centimeter scope, kind of flexible tool, but it's about the diameter of, say, my index finger. They insert that pretty crudely into your rectum and, keep going as far as you can tolerate. And they've got a camera there, of course, and he's looking in real time at what's going on and immediately said, this is severe, what looks like ulcerative colitis. He saw a lot of blood, polyps, and a lot of issues that are consistent with that, the mucus and other telltale signs. From there, I had a follow-up appointment. I was immediately prescribed drugs. They're still prescribing today, prednisone, Asacol, sulfur-based drugs. Went off and started that program, and my condition worsened. From there, I tried a series of drugs. I ended up being titled as atypical, and why that was is that I was maintaining my overall health and appearance. I wasn't losing a lot of weight. I was still very muscular. I was still very active, but my symptoms were at a severity level that was inordinate with how I was presenting otherwise. And as the doctors kind of moved me from specialist to specialist, referring me to people, even bringing in, say, people that were in the middle of a fellowship to try to get more eyes and more understanding of why I wasn't responding to the therapies, it became apparent that I was not going to be a normal case here where this drug therapy or that drug therapy was really going to manage or even mitigate the symptoms. In fact, I was worsening. So by the time I was 25, I was told I had to have the whole colon removed, that it was a detriment to my life. Now, it wasn't just colitis at this point. I was experiencing iritis, which is temporary blindness from the inflammation of your iris. I would go literally blind as a bat. And then I was having kind of arthritic issues, swelling in my hands, severe musculoskeletal pain. No matter what I took in prednisone, whether it was 5 milligrams or 25, I wasn't responding. All the other therapies and drugs that I tried didn't make a dent. I continued to worsen. So at 25, I started also onboarding other therapies and modalities, and that was Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. I flew to New York and tried a very off-label and illegal drug from a doctor at Sloan Kettering that believed he had solved for AIDS and other autoimmune issues that were caused by AIDS. That powder did nothing for me. I had seeds put in my ears by Indians. I mean, I really felt that I'd done it all. or at least within medicine's reach at that time, while still taking normal drug therapies. I was then put into these several experimental drugs, foam enemas that had antibiotic and anti-inflammatory properties that were really steroid-based. I tried thalidomide, which is famous for making deformed babies in the 1960s. Thalidomide did nothing. Went to, again, more and more doctors, more and more services, more and more therapies, but condition worsening. So when I was 29, exhausted, by then I was really starting to be affected physically. I could maybe surf for an hour and a half at the most. I went with the doctor's recommendation at UCLA and at Cedars-Sinai and opted to have my entire colon removed. I was told that what would happen is they would remove my colon. I'd remain in the hospital for about 11 to 19 days. I would have an ostomy bag, so an external pouch where the waste would be collected, and I have to be removing that and emptying it. It's smelly, they're dirty, and if you're vain and 29 years old and you're still trying to pretend that everything's normal, you don't want that. So I begged the doctor, who was the chief of surgery at UCLA at the time, to try to do the surgery in one pass, something they had never done at UCLA. And his challenge to me was, look, if you come here and present, and when I open you up, and mind you, they open you up from right here, kind of just below your rib cage, so they're as far as they can go, all the way to just above your scrotum, basically. So they're completely opening you up, and they have to cut through your stomach muscles and then pull all your organs that are, in the way of the colon, so to speak, or in the way of its removal, put those on your chest and then remove your colon. Then they take your ileum, which is the bottom of the small intestine, they fold it against itself, and they make a little pouch. And that little pouch gets connected to what's called a rectal cuff that they make. So basically right above your anus, on the inside of what you would consider your anus, and reconnect it. And now that is supposed to act as your colon. So his challenge again was, if I have the nutrition and I look like I'm healthy enough that I could survive the surgery in one pass, he'll go for it. I went back and I trained like a boxer trains for a fight. That's exactly how I thought about it. So I put on weight by eating excessively, which of course put more strain on my body and caused more inflammation. Mind you, something that I say today that's very relevant is every food you eat, unless you're picking it out of your backyard, probably has a toxic component to it. So more food, more toxins. Nonetheless, I was determined. And so to offset that issue, I started doing TPN, which is a nutrition that they do for people that can't eat. So think of it as intravenous or, fluids or foods that you get and you're in your hospital and you can't eat, or you're on their deathbed, so to speak. They'll do this for you. They IV infuse, nutrition basically. And I was doing that every day at home. That's how serious and how committed I was to doing it in one pass. I presented for surgery. Obviously, I'm lights out during surgery, so I have no idea what I'm going to wake up to. I woke up to find that they had done it in one pass, first time ever at UCLA. I was told I was definitely going to be banked at the hospital for 20 days. Again, I had the mindset and the determination that I would never want to be in the hospital for 20 days. I'd never see people really get well in a hospital, so my philosophy, even at that young age, was be home, recover there, get well. I had the same focus and energy that I had pre-surgery, even though I was in tremendous pain. Kind of the, I guess, Greek tragedy about being muscular, which I was, is that when they cut your abdomen and they cut through those stomach muscles, more muscle, more pain. So I had staples all the way down. I think it was 47 staples. Was in the hospital, severely drugged because of the excruciating pain. I think at that point, that was probably the seeds of my philosophical change in how I looked at Western medicine and started feeling it as very barbaric. Not just the look of the staples, but the idea that they wake you up several times a night when we know that sleep is so vital and important. They're giving you things like bone broth and Jell-O, neither of which are great for you unless they're very pure. Well, certainly Jell-O, it can't be pure, but say bone broth. And it's Campbell's bone broth, so high in salt, low in nutrition. The food they give you is basically the exact food that you wouldn't want to eat if you're trying to get healthy. And then again, the sleep disturbance, especially at a teaching hospital like UCLA, having really no respect for me and my own dignity. You're lying there unable to even cover yourself up, naked, and totally, really just unable to defend yourself, even defend your dignity. They'll come in with a group full of students and talk about what happened to this person as if you're not human. All that was awful. So I worked hard to get out of that hospital. I went home in 11 days, 8 days early. I would literally take my IV poles and roll them in to the hallway there where then nobody could see me because they kept telling me not to exercise. And I would do deep knee bends. I would sit in the sun. I'd find the hallways that had sun at different times of day and park myself in there and hide with my IV poles. All because I think intuitively I knew there was something wrong with putting me in a bed with no light, with poor nutrition, and with sleep disruption. And so by the time I went home, I think there was a shift in my mindset, or the seed, like I said, of that. I did skip part of that. During my 20s, I was in college. I was going to San Diego State, and I was so sick I wouldn't be able to make it to class. I'd have many mornings where I'd get up, I'd get ready, I'd maybe have spent the night in the bathroom, going to the bathroom so much, bleeding, anemic, malnourished, starving nutritionally, and put myself together, try to look my best, get on my way to class, and I'd have a bowel movement in my car. And so I knew every bathroom, every waypoint, every place I could hide, including where we're standing right now, where I could clean myself up. I always had a kit in my car of fresh shorts, t-shirt, changes of underwear, wipes, baby wipes, so I could survive and suffer that and maybe make it to class. I missed a lot of class. Was never that high-performing student. I didn't think it accorded with my ability, but I was dealing with something very real. At San Diego State, they put me in disabled student services because of the issues that the health was causing. So I was there with, a myriad of other people that had what I consider more severe issues. And I had to miss some semesters of school and retake them as well. So I had some grades expunged because of those issues. But I managed to get through, managed to graduate when I was 28 because it took a lot longer. And then again, I had the surgery when I was 29. At that time, I also had this fantasy of living in tropical Mexico. I tried that for a while, but couldn't survive it physically. That's where I met with the Huichol Indians and other people that came from the mountains that gave me, that very traditional, very indigenous treatment. That's where I'd have the seeds in my ears. I'd be drinking tinctures from things taken from the jungle. Some of that helped, but none of it was really solving for me. So I had to move home because I was too sick. I tried to move back after the surgery, had to move home again because I was too sick. So my life and my path and everything, every aspect of it was always disrupted by illness. Nonetheless, and I think it's important to say this, I never felt sorry for myself to the degree that maybe I had a right to feel sorry for myself because I looked at other people. I looked at a young man in our class in college whose family was murdered in Africa because they were politicians trying to bring democracy to the Congo. He had watched his mother and sister slain and raped in front of him. People share that with you and it puts it in perspective. But if you have colitis, you do have a right. If you have any illness, you have a right to, feel the way you feel about it. It is suffering. Mine was suffering. But I also think that it's important to look outside of that and look at people that have it worse than you and get some perspective and use that perspective to push through and to realize that if that guy can be in San Diego State, determined to go back and become the president of his country and be a high-performing, excellent student and an amazing human he was too, then there's very little excuse for me not to push. After college, I went to work in healthcare because during my rehab, I had worked for my mom, who, as I said, was in healthcare. And I started doing marketing. I was always a good talker, cleaned up well in spite of the colitis. And I started doing marketing for a health services company. I did very well as a marketer. I was their number one marketer. In fact, I was the number one marketer in San Diego in health services for 2 years. And that company was part of a roll-up eventually in my third year working for them. That roll-up was backed by GE Capital, and their idea was really to put all these companies together and make sort of a super services company. So I was learning a lot from these executives that had done and been and proven their mettle. And unfortunately, because of some mistakes they made, that company was forced to close. But because I had really a handle on my accounts and I was very appreciated by the people that I was serving, I saw that as an opportunity to open my own business. It's something I didn't mention is that I was also an emancipated minor. So, when I was 17, I left home. And that meant that during my time at San Diego State, I had access to financial grants and loans that were unattainable by parents or students who had parents that had income. I'd used some of that money to buy land in that tropical Mexico area that I mentioned. It was very early on. The place didn't even have a bus stop, so you'd have to get off at the road and walk a mile into town. But I bought land there first for $5,500. Then I went and bought another piece of land in partnership for $25,000. And we started doing some building. And so when you fast forward to when I'm 30, 31 years old, 32 years old, and all this is happening with the company, I had banked some of that money from a sale of the land. And I opened my company with that money. That company was Pacific Health and Medical. We did well for a number of years. We had 8 great years. And then during the financial collapse of 2008, we were real disrupted. I had to close that company, kind of lick my wounds, took my first loss in business, and recovered from that by literally getting a moving truck with my best friend, taking what we had left in assets and opening a small office here in Bird Rock with what I had left in loans and capital. I had sold off my 401k by then and started again, Discovery Health Services. Started a home care agency, got licensed. That was Home Care La Jolla. I built those 2 companies up, started doing well about 5 years ago, very well. We built that company to $25 million in annual revenue. But in 2015, before I got to that seminal time when the company started doing very well, I went on a surf trip. I came back sicker than I had been. I was still suffering of Crohn's and colitis. So imagine now I'm 44 years old and I've still got the same issues. I've been now told that I have Crohn's as well as colitis, and that's why my symptoms had not resolved with the surgery. I went and saw our doctors. I had great doctors, or these guys that had a great reputation for being the best, smartest, brightest. But again, juxtaposed against the fact that I was doing no better. So I went back to them and I said, look, I'm having this shaking and rattling. I'm gaining weight, but it's impossible because I'm not really eating. I don't know what's going on. I have no energy. I can barely lift my arms. And they put me through a battery of tests. They hospitalized me consecutive weeks. Kind of got nowhere. And so I was frustrated. I had, again, shaky confidence in the doctors and their approach, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. And finally, a friend mentioned in passing that they had seen a naturopathic doctor in North County, San Diego, and it had been life-changing for them. So I got this doctor's name. I went and visited him, and I sat down in the first meeting, and I presented all these lab tests that I had, thinking he's going to be so impressed that I had labs from Cedars and UCLA and UC Irvine and UCSD here, and even doctors at Scripps. I'd seen everybody by then. I was a known entity in this community. And so I show him my tests and I say, figure it out. And he looked at it, and I'll never forget, he looked at it and said, these tests are, these are nothing. This is no data. This tells me nothing. This is a battery of tests that you do for somebody that has, some normal issue. But what I'm going to do is functional lab testing, and we're going to take a look at what's going on with your gut. But in looking at you and in looking at your labs, I see that you're probably nutritionally starved. So I'm going to give you an IV today. I'm just going to load it with everything I can. We're going to have you sit there and do an IV in the office. It'll take about an hour and a half. I did that. I left, and unforgettably, I got in my car, and I, had kind of an emotional breakdown. And it wasn't because I was so upset. It's because I felt energy. I felt good. I felt probably what you feel if I'm talking to somebody that's not sick. I felt like I could surf for more than 2 hours. And I just couldn't believe that, based on what he explained, it was nutrition. It wasn't my colon. It wasn't a small intestine issue. It wasn't any of these things. I was nutritionally starved, and somehow this had been missed. Fast forward a little bit more, and I get tested for celiac, and it turns out I can't tolerate gluten. So every time I'm eating gluten, which ironically is exactly what the doctors in these different healthcare facilities told me to do, eat foods that constipate you, eat bread, eat rice, eat these dry things. Well, these dry things, as many now know, are nutritionally starved. They're bereft of anything good for you. And in fact, if you have any kind of sensitivity to gluten, you're poisoning yourself. You're causing inflammation while you're nutritionally starving yourself. So that was really the picture. Once I built up with the IV therapy and started changing my diet and started being in accord with what this naturopathic doctor taught me about nutrition science, these aren't theories, these aren't kooky things, I started getting healthy. And I decoupled from all the medication, the prednisone first, then the Asacol, then the enemas, on and on down the line. And another big one for me was the antibiotics that they kept giving me. They'd be raining down antibiotics on my body because of the persistent inflammation that they called pouchitis from that kind of pouch they created out of my ileum. And so once I started building up my microbiome and I started getting myself healthy by eating nutritional foods and I dropped the gluten, I became me. I started feeling my essence, my energy, my muscles started building, my everything started working, my cognition, the brain fog, the forgetfulness, all the other little things that I didn't even bother mentioning went away. I never had the iritis again. I never had the aches and pains in my hands. It just was life-changing. But my issue with my naturopath, who is amazing, in his practice is the way the practice worked. I didn't like that I'd go there and they'd keep me waiting. I'd already done a lot of that with a doctor's office, right? You go, you sit, there's magazines from 3 years ago, the chairs are dirty, and insultingly, they connect the pen to the clipboard, they'll put a little rope on it, so God forbid you steal their pen. The people at the front desk are never very friendly, kind of treat you like chattel. So I felt it's time for that to be broken down, and I think I know what to do. And what to do was KOI, a place that's welcoming, where you feel great right when you walk in. It's actually a place you want to be, and where your doctor comes out and meets you almost immediately, except in extreme circumstance. That's my disclaimer. And where we really are focused only on your wellness, and we're using science, we're using the best, deepest testing, and we're individualizing it. And we're looking not to address your symptoms. That's not really the concern. The concern is the cause of the symptoms. And that's where we're at now. And I'm happy to say that I believe that everybody else is now catching up, that this is becoming a trend. Typically, because I'm an independent thinker, I don't like trends. But if this is the trend, I'm backing it. And that's mostly my story.